What happens when the owner of a billion-dollar airline is told she doesn't belong on her own plane? The shocking answer will leave you speechless. The morning sun cast golden rays through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Atlanta's Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport as Captain Zara Williams adjusted her navy blue pilot's uniform. For gleaming gold stripes adorned her shoulders, each one representing years of dedication, countless hours in the cockpit, and a journey that had taken her from flight school valedictorian to the helm of a major airline. She checked the reflection in the terminal window, crisp white shirt beneath her jacket, perfectly knotted tie, captain's wings gleaming on her chest. Everything was in order. Flight 447 to Chicago was scheduled to depart in 45 minutes. Zara had flown this route hundreds of times, but today felt different. Today, she would be presenting a groundbreaking anti-discrimination policy to Skywing's board of directors immediately after landing. The irony of what was about to unfold would not be lost on anyone. As she made her way down the jet bridge, her leather pilot's briefcase in hand, Zara felt the familiar anticipation of flight. 23 years of flying had never diminished that feeling. The rush of taking hundreds of people safely through the sky, the responsibility, the precision required. She had earned her commercial pilot's license at 25, graduated from Harvard with an MBA, and had flown everything from small Cessnas to massive Boeing 777s. Yet none of that preparation could have readied her for what was about to happen. The first-class cabin of the Boeing 737 was a study in understated luxury. Cream leather seats, polished with accents and soft ambient lighting. Passengers were still boarding, stowing their carry-ons and settling into their seats. Zara walked down the aisle with the confident stride of someone who knew every inch of this aircraft, heading toward the cockpit where her co-pilot, Captain Tommy Thompson, was completing the pre-flight checklist. That's when she saw the beverage cart. It appeared suddenly, blocking the narrow aisle like a metallic barrier. Behind it stood Brittany Monroe, a flight attendant whose name tag gleamed under the cabin lights. Brittany was young, perhaps in her late 20s, with blonde hair pulled back in a regulation bun and an expression that radiated authority, or what she believed was authority. "Excuse me," Zara said politely, expecting Brittany to move the cart aside. Instead, Brittany's eyes traveled up and down Zara's uniform with undisguised suspicion, her lips pressed into a thin line, and when she spoke, her voice carried across the cabin with deliberate volume. "Ma'am, you need to leave this aircraft immediately." The words hung in the air like smoke. Several passengers looked up from their phones and magazines, sensing drama. Zara felt familiar tightness in her chest. Not fear, but a weary recognition. She had faced this before, though never quite so publicly. "I'm Captain Williams," Zara explained, her voice steady and professional. "This is Flight 447. I'm scheduled to pilot this aircraft." Brittany's expression didn't soften. If anything, her stance became more rigid. She grabbed her radio with one hand, while keeping the other firmly on the beverage cart. "Security! We have an unauthorized person refusing to exit the plane. Repeat, unauthorized individual in first class." In Seat 2A, a teenage boy named Malik Johnson fumbled for his phone. His fingers flew across the screen, opening Instagram Live with the instinct of someone who had grown up documenting everything. "Y'all seeing this?" he whispered into his phone, angling the camera to capture the scene. Within seconds, 12 viewers were watching. That number would soon explode into thousands. Zara reached into her jacket pocket, retrieving her credentials. The ID card was official, complete with her photo, pilot's license number, and the Skywing logo embossed in gold. She held it up for Brittany to see. "Here's my identification. I'm Captain Zara Williams, and I need to reach the cockpit to prepare for departure." Brittany barely glanced at the ID. Her dismissal was so casual, it was almost impressive. "Nice fake ID. Did you order that online? Maybe from the same place you got that costume." A businessman in Seat 1C lowered his newspaper, his expression shifting from casual interest to concern. "Excuse me, but she's clearly wearing a pilot's uniform. Perhaps you should—" "Sir, please let us handle this," Brittany interrupted, her voice sharp. "Some people will do anything for attention these days. This isn't Comic-Con." The cabin was filling with tension, as thick as fog. More passengers were pulling out their phones now. A middle-aged woman in 2B leaned forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had raised teenagers and taken no nonsense from anyone. "Young lady, that pilot has been nothing but professional. Maybe you should check your attitude." Brittany spun around, her face flushing. "Ma'am, I'm just doing my job. We can't have random people wandering around in pilot costumes. It's a security issue." "Random people?" The woman's voice sharpened like a blade. "She's clearly qualified. She showed you identification." Zara watched the scene unfold with a strange sense of detachment. She had prepared presentations on this exact scenario. Unconscious bias, assumptions based on appearance, the escalation of minor confrontations into major incidents. She had studied the case law, reviewed the statistics, analyzed the financial impact of discrimination on airline operations. But standing in the middle of it, being the subject rather than the analyst, was entirely different. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A text from James Martinez, Skywing CFO. Board meeting moved to 3 p.m. New discrimination policy draft ready for review. The irony struck her with the force of a lightning bolt. In less than 3 hours, she would be standing before the board of directors, presenting comprehensive anti-bias training protocols. She would be showing them statistics, case studies, and implementation timelines for policies designed to prevent exactly this kind of situation. And here she was, living the very scenario those policies were meant to address. Brittany noticed Zara checking her phone, and her expression twisted into something uglier. Oh, taking selfies? Planning to post about how unfairly you were treated? Her voice dripped with sarcasm. Maybe next time dress appropriately for your actual job. Zara looked up slowly, her voice quiet but carrying clearly through the cabin. And what job would that be? Brittany's smile was razor-thin. Cutting. Probably something in customer service. Or maybe housekeeping. The cabin fell completely silent. Even the background of the aircraft seemed to pause. The businessman in one seat carefully folded his newspaper, staring at Brittany with open disgust. Malik's phone shook slightly in his hands as his viewer count jumped. 47, 63, 96 viewers. The comment section exploded. Did she just say housekeeping? This is racist AF. Screenshot this. An elderly gentleman in seat 1D rose slowly to his feet, his movements deliberate. He was probably in his 70s, with silver hair and the bearing of someone who had seen enough of life to recognize injustice when it appeared. Young woman, he said, his voice carrying the weight of decades. I've been flying for 60 years. That pilot has more professionalism in her little finger than you've shown this entire time. Brittany's cheeks flushed darker. Sir, I'm following protocol. We can't just let anyone. Anyone what? The elderly man pressed forward, cutting through her excuse. Anyone who doesn't fit your narrow expectations of what a pilot should look like. The question hung in the air like an accusation. Zara felt the weight of her briefcase in her hand. Inside, along with flight manuals and navigation charts, was something few people in aviation possessed, a Skywing Platinum Executive Card. Only 12 existed worldwide. She had received hers 18 months ago when she completed the acquisition of controlling shares in the airline. The card was more than just a symbol of status. It represented absolute authority over every aspect of Skywing's operations. She could end this confrontation in seconds. One flash of that card, one phone call, and Brittany would understand exactly who she was dealing with. But Zara's hand stayed in her briefcase, her fingers brushing against the card's cool titanium surface without withdrawing it. Because this wasn't just about her anymore. Thousands of pilots, flight attendants, gate agents, and passengers face similar discrimination every single day. They didn't have platinum cards or controlling shares in airlines. They didn't have the power to make one phone call and ground an entire fleet. They just had their dignity, their credentials, and the hope that someone would believe them. If Zara simply pulled out her executive card and revealed her position, the lesson would be lost. The message would become discriminate against people carefully because they might be important, rather than don't discriminate because every human being deserves respect. The overhead speaker crackled to life. Flight 447 passengers, we're experiencing a brief delay. We'll have you in the air shortly. The voice belonged to Captain Thompson, her co-pilot, waiting in the cockpit and probably wondering where she was. Brittany seized a moment triumphantly. See? That's the real pilot. Male, experienced professional. Malik's viewer count hit 156. Someone with a larger following had shared his live stream. The hashtag Skywing Discrimination was beginning to trend in Atlanta. Zara's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a news alert. American Airlines settles discrimination lawsuit for $9.8 million. The universe, it seemed, had a dark sense of timing. She looked at Brittany, then at the growing crowd of passengers who were watching, recording, and judging. She looked at Malik's phone, broadcasting this moment to hundreds of people in real time, creating a permanent record that would be viewed thousands, maybe millions of times. This was no longer just a confrontation on an airplane. This was a teaching moment, a case study in progress, a real-world example of the very policies she would be presenting to the board in a few hours. Brittany, Zara said, her voice carrying a weight that made several passengers look up from their phones. Each word was measured, deliberate. You might want to reconsider your approach to the situation. But Brittany was already reaching for her radio again, her decision made. Ground control, this is Flight 447 requesting security for passenger removal. We have an individual impersonating airline crew and refusing to deplane. The die was cast. Within 90 seconds, the situation exploded beyond the confines of first class. Gate Supervisor Derek Martinez appeared at the aircraft door, his radio crackling with chatter from ground control. Behind him, 2 airport security officers adjusted their utility belts. their hands resting casually near their radios, a gesture that was meant to appear professional but carried an undercurrent of potential force. Derek was in his mid-40s, with the weathered look of someone who had spent 15 years managing gate operations. He had seen it all: drunk passengers, medical emergencies, mechanical delays, and every variety of human drama that airports could produce. But as he looked at the scene before him, uncertainty flickered across his face. A black woman in a pilot's uniform, standing with perfect posture and absolute composure. A flight attendant blocking the aisle with a beverage cart. Multiple passengers with their phones out, recording everything. And the tension, thick enough to cut with a knife. What's the situation here? Derek's voice carried the practiced authority of someone who had defused hundreds of confrontations. Brittany straightened her posture, her confidence returning now that reinforcements had arrived. We have an unauthorized individual impersonating airline crew. She's refusing to exit the aircraft and disrupting our departure schedule. Derek's eyes swept over Zara again. Her uniform, her posture, her captain's briefcase, her credentials still in hand. For a moment, something like doubt crossed his face. Then he looked back at Brittany, his subordinate, the employee who had called for help, and he made his choice. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with us." The words fell like a judge's gavel. Malik's live stream hit 312 viewers. The comment section was chaos. Record everything. "This is insane. Share this now." Screenshots were being taken. Videos were being downloaded and re-uploaded. And the story was spreading across social media like wildfire. The businessman in onesie stood up, his newspaper forgotten. "This is absolutely ridiculous. That woman is clearly a pilot. Look at her uniform, her credentials, her bearing. This is discrimination, pure and simple." "Sir, please remain seated," Officer Rodriguez interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. "We're handling the situation." But the businessman wasn't alone anymore. The elderly gentleman from 1D stood beside him, along with a middle-aged woman from 2B. A pocket of resistance was forming in first class, passengers who recognized injustice when they saw it and weren't willing to stay silent. "I've been flying for 60 years, the elderly man repeated, his voice stronger now. "This is discrimination. I'm witnessing it right here, right now, and I won't pretend otherwise." Officer Williams, the second security officer, stepped forward. The irony of his surname wasn't lost on Zara. Another Williams, perhaps with his own experiences of being judged by appearance rather than capability. But he had a job to do, and right now, she represented disruption to the orderly world he was paid to maintain. "Everyone needs to calm down and let us do our job," Officer Williams said, his hand moving to his radio. Derek pulled out his phone, presumably to call station management. While he dialed, Zara noticed something that made her pulse quicken despite her outward calm. The live stream wasn't just Malik anymore. A woman in 3A had opened TikTok and was recording. A man in 2C had his camera app open, the red recording indicator visible. Even a flight attendant from economy class had discreetly positioned herself at the boundary between cabins, her phone angled to capture the scene. Multiple angles, multiple platforms, multiple witnesses. This moment was being captured and broadcast in real time to hundreds, possibly thousands of viewers. The very technology she had helped implement as part of Skywing's social media monitoring system, designed to track customer sentiment and identify potential PR issues, was now documenting her own humiliation. The system she had built was working exactly as intended. It just wasn't working for her. Paula Monroe burst through the aircraft door like a storm system, short, sharp-featured, with the demeanor of someone who had climbed the corporate ladder by never backing down from a fight. As station manager, she was a final authority at this gate, the person whose decision would either end this confrontation or escalate it beyond anyone's control. What in the hell is going on here? Paula's voice cut through the chatter like a knife. "We have a schedule to maintain. Delays cost this airline thousands of dollars per minute." Derek quickly briefed her, painting Zara as a disruptive passenger who had somehow obtained a convincing pilot's uniform and was refusing to deplane. His summary was efficient, professional, and completely wrong, but he delivered it with the confidence of someone who believed he was doing his job correctly. Paula's eyes narrowed as she studied Zara, taking in every detail from head to toe. The uniform was authentic. That much was obvious. The bearing was professional. The credentials looked legitimate. But something in Paula's expression suggested that legitimacy wasn't a real issue here. "Even if you are some kind of pilot," Paula said, her tone dripping with skepticism, "you're clearly not our pilot. Skywing has standards." The words hit the cabin like a physical blow. Several passengers gasped audibly. The woman streaming on TikTok zoomed in on Paula's face, capturing the moment for posterity. Malik's viewer count exploded. 847, 923, 1,156. Someone with a large following had shared his stream. The hashtag Skywing Discrimination was now trending in Atlanta, competing with hashtag Skywing Owner for attention. Standards. The businessman from 1C repeated, his voice heavy with disgust. Are you hearing yourselves right now? Do you understand what you're actually saying? Paula whipped around, her face flushing. Sir, if you don't remain seated, you'll be removed from this flight as well. The threat backfired spectacularly. More passengers stood up. The cabin divided into clear camps. Those defending Zara, those recording silently, and those too intimidated by authority to speak, but clearly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. The atmosphere was electric with tension, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. This is going viral, someone whispered from the back of first class. Good. Another passenger replied firmly. People need to see this. Officer Rodriguez spoke into his radio, his voice low but urgent. Control, we might need backup at gate C12. The situation is escalating. Multiple passengers involved. That's when the cockpit door opened, and everything changed. Captain Tommy Thompson appeared in the doorway, his confusion evident. He was in his early 50s, with a silver-touched hair and confident bearing of someone who had flown military jets before transitioning to commercial aviation. Stanford graduate, 8 years flying F-16s, 3 years with Skywing, a good pilot, a decent man, and right now, very confused about why his captain was in the cockpit. What's going on out here? Thompson's voice carried the natural authority of someone used to being in command. Where's Captain Williams? The cabin fell completely silent. Even the recording seemed to pause, everyone holding their breath for what would come next. Derek stepped forward confidently, still believing he was handling a security threat. Captain, we're removing a disruptive passenger who was impersonating crew. We'll have this resolved shortly and get you in the air. Thompson looked around the cabin until his eyes found Zara. His expression shifted in rapid succession. Confusion melting into disbelief. Disbelief hardening into barely contained anger. That is Captain Williams, he said, his voice carrying absolute authority. We're scheduled to fly together today. Have been for the past 6 months. I've flown with her dozens of times. She's one of the best pilots in this airline. Brittany's face went pale. Paula's mouth opened and closed without sound. Derek took a step backward, as a physical distance might somehow separate him from his mistake. But Paula recovered quickly, her corporate training kicking in with the smooth efficiency of someone practiced in deflection. Well, if she's really a pilot, why didn't she just show proper identification from beginning? Why cause all this drama? The blame shifting was masterful. Turn the victim into the aggressor. Make her responsible for the discrimination she experienced. It was a technique as old as prejudice itself. When caught in the act, claim the victim provoked the response. I showed my identification, Zara said quietly, her voice cutting through Paula's deflection. Multiple times. You chose not to believe it. Malik's stream was approaching 1,500 viewers. Comments flooded in from across the country. Atlanta airport discrimination. Skywing needs to answer for this. Screenshot those employee names. The story was spreading beyond Atlanta, beyond aviation circles, becoming a national conversation about bias and prejudice in real time. Zara reached into her jacket pocket, her fingers closing around the Skywing Platinum executive card. The card that would end this immediately. The card that would reveal her true position and send shockwaves through everyone present. But she paused. Her hand remained in her pocket, feeling the weight of the titanium card. Because pulling it out now would teach the wrong lesson. It would say that discrimination is wrong because you might be targeting someone important, rather than the truth. That discrimination is wrong because every person deserves dignity and respect regardless of their position. Officer Rodriguez, Zara said quietly, her voice carrying a new edge that made several people look up. Before you escort me off this plane, I'd like to make a phone call. Rodriguez hesitated, glancing at Derek for guidance. Ma'am, you can call whoever you want from the terminal. No, Zara interrupted, her voice taking on a tone of absolute authority. I think I'll make it right here, right now, where everyone can witness it. She pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering over a contact name that appeared only as James M. The call that would change everything. The call that would transform this personal humiliation into a corporate earthquake. The phone rang once. James, it's Zara. Her voice was calm, measured, carrying clearly through the silent cabin. I need you to ground all Skywing operations immediately. System-wide hold. Authorization code 77, Alpha 9. Board meeting emergency protocol. Execute now. The call lasted exactly 47 seconds. For 30 seconds after it ended, nothing happened. Paula smirked, believing it had been a bluff. Derek shook his head, dismissing the call as a desperate attempt at leverage. Brittany's confidence returned, her posture straightening as if the whole ordeal was nearly over. Then the screen started changing. The departure board at gate C12 flickered. Flight 447 status switched from boarding to delayed, then to something that made every airline employee in the terminal freeze. Operations suspended. Within 90 seconds, every Skywing flight on the board showed the same status. The gate agent's computer chimed with an emergency alert. Her face went white as she read the message scrolling across her screen. She grabbed her phone and started dialing frantically, getting busy signals one after another. "What the hell?" Derek muttered, pulling out his radio with shaking hands. "Control, what's the status of Skywing operations?" The radio crackled back immediately, the voice on the other end tinged with controlled panic. "All Skywing flights grounded by executive order. We're trying to reach management now. Nobody's answering phones. I repeat, all Skywing operations are suspended pending executive authorization." Paula's smirk vanished like smoke. Her face drained of color as realization hit her with the force of a freight train. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Nobody has that kind of authority except..." She stopped mid-sentence, unable or unwilling to complete the thought. Malik's live stream exploded. His viewer count hit 2,847 and climbed rapidly. 3,100, 3,600, 4,200. Comments flooded the screen faster than anyone could read. "Did she just ground the airline? Who is she? Holy shit. This is insane." Screen record everything. Other passengers were checking their phones, seeing news alerts about Skywing's sudden operational suspension. Aviation Twitter was exploding. Reddit threads were spawning. The story was jumping from social media to mainstream news in real time. The businessman in 1C was refreshing his flight app repeatedly, watching his Chicago connection disappear, then his backup options, then every Skywing flight in his itinerary. His expression wasn't anger, it was awe. Zara reached into her jacket and withdrew the Skywing Platinum Executive card. The card was black titanium with gold lettering, noticeably heavier than normal plastic. Security chips were visible through the translucent material, catching the cabin lights and refracting tiny rainbows. Only 12 existed in the world, given only to board members and majority shareholders. She held it up for everyone to see, rotating it slowly so the holographic Skywing logo caught the light. "My name is Zara Williams," she said, her voice carrying across the silent cabin with devastating calm. "I'm not just a pilot for Skywing Airlines." She paused, letting the moment build. Every phone in the cabin was pointed at her. Every passenger was leaning forward. Even the security officers had frozen, sensing they were witnessing something extraordinary. "I own Skywing Airlines." The silence that followed was absolute. Brittany's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Derek's radio slipped from his hand and clattered to the floor, the sound echoing in the stillness. Paula grabbed the nearest seat to steady herself, her knuckles white against the blue fabric. Officer Rodriguez found his voice first. "Ma'am, are you saying you're the majority stockholder and CEO of Skywing Airlines?" "Yes," Zara confirmed, her tone conversational, almost gentle. "I acquired controlling shares 18 months ago through a private equity deal. I've been flying routes personally to understand operations from the ground up, to see what my employees experience, what my passengers experience, and where our systems fail." She pulled out her tablet and showed the screen displaying her corporate email signature. Zara Williams, Chief Executive Officer, Skywing Airlines Incorporated. Captain Thompson stepped forward from the cockpit door, his expression serious. "Ladies and gentlemen, I can confirm that Captain Williams is indeed the owner of this airline. We've flown together many times over the past year. She's one of the most skilled pilots I've ever worked with, and one of the finest leaders in aviation." The businessman in 1C started laughing, not with humor, but with the kind of disbelief that borders on hysteria. "You try to kick the owner off her own plane," he said, looking at Brittany with something between pity and disgust. "The actual owner." A woman in 3B whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Oh my God, this is better than any movie." Malik's phone was shaking in his hands. His live stream viewer count had peaked at over 12,000. The video will be viewed millions of times in coming days, cited in news articles, discussed on talk shows, analyzed in business schools, and remembered as a moment when one airline's discrimination problem became an industry-wide reckoning. But Zara wasn't finished. Not even close. She looked directly at Brittany, her gaze steady and unforgiving. "Brittany, you said Skywing is standards. You're absolutely right. We do." She pulled up her tablet and swiped to a presentation she had been preparing for the board meeting. Charts, graphs, legal documents, all professionally formatted and bearing the Skywing corporate logo. According to Federal Aviation Regulation 121.391, airlines are liable for employee discrimination. Current case law suggests damages between $50 and $200 million for systemic bias issues. Paula tried to interject, her voice cracking. "Miss Williams, I'm sure we can resolve this." "I'm not finished." The authority in Zara's voice could have stopped a freight train. "Skywing processes 2.3 million passengers monthly. We generate $847 million in quarterly revenue." She swiped to the next slide, revealing real financial data that made several passengers gasp. Numbers that represented the airline industry's most closely guarded secrets. profit margins, operational costs, and the true financial impact of customer dissatisfaction. Customer satisfaction has dropped 12% this year. Discrimination complaints are up 34%, based on our social media monitoring algorithms I personally helped develop. Today's incident will cost us approximately $2.8 million in bookings within 48 hours. Derek's radio squawked again, the voice sounding increasingly urgent. All units. We have confirmation from corporate headquarters. Skywing operations grounded by CEO Zara Williams. Repeat. CEO Williams has executive authority for all company decisions. This is not a drill. The weight of those words settled over the cabin like a heavy blanket. Even Officer Rodriguez straightened his posture, recognizing he was in the presence of someone with genuine, absolute power. Zara looked directly at Brittany, whose earlier confidence had completely evaporated. You asked if I was taking selfies to post about unfair treatment. As it happens, Skywing has robust social media monitoring. We track every mention, every complaint, every video posted about our company. She gestured toward Malik, still live streaming with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. This incident is currently being viewed by over 4,000 people in real time. It's been shared on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and Facebook. The video will be seen by hundreds of thousands, possibly millions, within 24 hours. Brittany's face had gone completely pale. I didn't know. I'm so sorry. You didn't know my position, Zara agreed, her voice softening slightly but losing none of its authority. But you knew I was a human being wearing a pilot's uniform with proper credentials. You saw my identification. You heard my colleague confirm my identity. That should have been enough. She turned to Paula, her expression becoming even more serious. You said even if I was some kind of pilot, I wasn't your pilot because Skywing has standards. What standard were you referring to, exactly? Paula stammered, unable to form a coherent response. Let me help you, Zara continued. Skywing's official mission statement includes the phrase dignity and respect for every passenger and employee. Our employee handbook specifically prohibits discrimination based on race, gender, or appearance. Both documents carry my signature. The tablet screen showed Skywing's actual policies, legal language, anti-discrimination clauses, penalty structures that could end careers and trigger lawsuits. Everything was real, documented, and incontrovertible. Malik's viewer count hit 5,600. The comments were a flood of outrage, support, and disbelief. Screenshots going viral. This is history. Show their faces. Justice in real time. But Zara had one more revelation that would change everything, not just for these employees, but for the entire aviation industry. There's something else you should know about today. Zara checked her Patek Philippe watch, the one she had purchased after her first successful equity deal, a reminder of how far she had come. In exactly 97 minutes, I was scheduled to present a new company-wide anti-discrimination policy to Skywing's board of directors. She swiped to another slide, showing draft policy documents, implementation timelines, and budget allocations that represented months of research and planning. The presentation includes mandatory bias training for all employees, anonymous reporting systems for discrimination incidents, and immediate termination protocols for repeat offenders. I was going to recommend a gradual rollout over 6 months. She paused, looking around the cabin at the faces watching her, passengers, employees, security officers, all frozen in this moment. But today's event suggests we need immediate implementation. Her phone buzzed with a text from James Martinez. Airport security confirmed you're okay. Media started a call about grounded flights. CNN wants a statement. Zara showed the message to the group. My CFO is concerned. The media is asking questions. This situation has moved beyond our aircraft, beyond this airport. This is now a national story about discrimination in aviation, corporate accountability, and whether someone who experiences bias has any real recourse. She looked around the cabin, her gaze settling on each person who participated in the discrimination, memorizing faces, badge numbers, and the exact sequence of events. So now we have choices to make, Zara continued, her voice taking on the tone she used in board meetings with Fortune 500 executives. We can handle this internally with appropriate consequences and systematic changes. Or we can let this play out in the court of public opinion, with legal teams, federal investigations, and PR disasters that could take years to resolve. The live stream viewer count hit 6,800. Comments were flowing too fast to read, but certain phrases kept appearing. Justice. Accountability. This is how you use power. Make them pay. Brittany, Zara said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. What choice would you like to make? Brittany's answer came in the form of tears. Not the manipulative tears of someone trying to escape consequences, but the genuine breakdown of a person realizing the magnitude of their mistake. Her shoulders shook as the weight of potentially destroying her career, facing legal action, and becoming the face of workplace discrimination settled over her. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm so sorry. I was wrong. everything I did was wrong. But Zara wasn't interested in apologies alone. Apologies without consequences were just words, and words without action meant nothing. James Martinez, my CFO, will arrive in approximately 12 minutes, Zara announced, checking her phone. He's bringing our legal team and HR director. We're going to handle this systematically, professionally, and in a way that ensures this never happens again, not just on Skywing, but across the entire aviation industry. As if summoned by her words, 3 people in expensive suits appeared at the aircraft door. The man in the lead was tall, Hispanic, carrying a leather briefcase, clearly James Martinez. Behind him, a sharp-eyed woman with a legal pad and a nervous-looking man clutching an iPad. Zara, James said, his voice carrying the easy familiarity of someone who had worked with her for years. Are you all right? I'm fine, James. But we have a situation that requires immediate corporate response. James's gaze swept the cabin, taking in security officers, the crying flight attendant, the live-streaming teenager, and the uncomfortable-looking managers. His expression hardened with understanding. I see. He turned to the woman behind him. Sarah, please begin documenting everything. Sarah Monroe, no relation to Paula or Brittany, despite the shared surname, was Skywing's chief legal counsel. She had handled discrimination cases before, including a $15 million settlement with Delta the previous year. Before we proceed, Zara announced to the cabin, I want everyone to understand the legal framework we're operating under. Sarah stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had argued cases before federal judges. Under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, employers are liable for discriminatory actions by their employees. The average settlement for airline discrimination cases in 2024 was $23.7 million. Paula's face went white. Derek started backing toward the exit. Wait, Zara said, her voice stopping Derek mid-step. Nobody leaves until we've addressed this completely. Everyone involved needs to understand the consequences, the policies that were violated, and the changes that will be implemented. James opened his tablet and began reading from Skywing's financial reports. Current quarterly revenue, $847 million. Daily operational costs, $9.2 million. Cost of grounding all flights for 1 hour, $384,000. The numbers hit the cabin like physical blows. Brittany's crying intensified. Paula gripped the seat back harder. Miss Paula Monroe. Zara addressed the station manager directly. You're currently earning $87,000 annually. Your pension vests in 14 months. Your mortgage payment is $2,240 monthly. Paula's mouth fell open. How do you? I have access to all employee financial information, Zara explained calmly. I also know you have 2 children in college, and your husband was recently laid off. These aren't threats, they're facts. Real-world consequences that discrimination creates for everyone involved. Sarah pulled out her legal pad. Ms. Monroe, your actions today violated Skywing policies 4.1, 4.7, and 6.3. The standard penalty for multiple policy violations is immediate termination. Please, Paula whispered, tears forming in her eyes. I have a family. So do the passengers you discriminated against, Zara replied, her voice not unkind but absolutely firm. So do the millions of people who will see this video and judge our airline based on your behavior. So do the employees across our company who deserve to work in an environment free from bias. James showed his tablet to the group. Current social media metrics. Hashtag Skywing Discrimination has had 47,000 mentions in the past hour. Sentiment analysis shows 89% negative toward the Skywing brand. Malik's live stream had reached 8,200 viewers. The story was being picked up by news outlets. CNN had already posted a breaking news alert about Skywing's operational suspension. The question, Zara continued, is whether we handle this as an internal matter with appropriate consequences, or whether we let federal investigators and civil rights attorneys determine the outcome. She pulled out her phone and showed a list of missed calls. I have 17 voicemails from lawyers offering to represent passengers who witnessed this incident. Class action suits can reach hundreds of millions in damages. Derek found his voice. Ms. Williams, what do you want from us? I want acknowledgement of wrongdoing. I want commitment to change. And I want concrete actions that prevent this from happening again. Not just on this flight, but across the entire aviation industry. Sarah opened a folder and spread documents across an empty seat. We prepared options for resolution. But before we discuss individual consequences, let's talk about systematic changes. Zara pulled up her tablet again, showing the anti-discrimination policy she had been preparing for the board meeting. Skywing will implement immediate company-wide changes. Mandatory bias training for all employees within 30 days. Anonymous reporting systems accessible via QR codes at every gate. Real-time monitoring of employee interactions using advanced AI systems. James added, department budgets will be tied to diversity metrics. Managers who fail to maintain inclusive environments will face automatic performance reviews and potential pay reductions. Additionally, Zara continued, we're establishing a $5 million fund for anti-discrimination training programs industry-wide. We'll make our training materials available to other airlines. We'll lobby for federal requirements for bias training in aviation. This incident will become a catalyst for change across the entire industry. The scope was breathtaking. One incident on one flight, transforming into systematic change across aviation. Ms. Paula Monroe, Zara addressed the station manager. You have a choice. Option 1. Immediate termination with cause, no reference, potential personal liability in civil suits. Option 2. Demotion to gate agent with a 40% pay reduction, completion of 200 hours of sensitivity training, and probationary employment with any future incident resulting in immediate termination. Paula nodded frantically. Option 2. Please, I'll do whatever it takes. Mr. Derek Martinez, you'll be transferred to customer service. Your supervisor role will be eliminated. You'll complete the same training requirements. Additionally, you'll serve as a trainer, using your own experience to educate other employees. Derek's shoulders sagged. I understand. Thank you for the opportunity to make this right. Ms. Brittany Monroe. Zara finally addressed the flight attendant directly. You have a choice. Immediate termination with neutral reference, or 6 months unpaid suspension, 300 hours of community service with civil rights organizations, and probationary reemployment as a diversity training coordinator. Brittany looked up through her tears. The suspension and community service. I want to make this right. I need to understand what I did, why it was wrong, and how to help prevent others from making the same mistakes. The video of this incident will be used in our training programs, Zara announced. Your faces, your words, your actions will educate thousands of employees about the consequences of discrimination. You'll participate in creating those training materials. You'll tell your story honestly, without excuse or deflection. Sarah set up a camera on her tablet. We're going to record personal apologies right now. These will be posted on Skywing's official social media channels within the hour. The apologies must acknowledge specific wrongdoing, express genuine remorse, and commit to personal change. One by one, Brittany, Paula, and Derek recorded their statements. Brittany's was particularly powerful. She spoke directly about her assumptions, her failure to verify information, her escalation of the situation, and her commitment to understanding her own biases. When the recordings were complete and uploaded to Skywing servers, Zara pulled out her phone and dialed James's extension. Execute Operation Restart. All flights resume immediately. Authorization Code 77, Alpha 9. Corporate announcement to follow in 30 minutes. Within minutes, the departure boards began updating. Flight 447 showed boarding resumed. Passengers who had left the gate began filing back. The aircraft came back to life. Malik finally ended his live stream, his viewer count having peaked at over 12,000. The video would be viewed millions of times in the coming days, becoming required viewing in business schools, diversity training programs, and corporate boardrooms. As passengers settled back into their seats, Zara turned to Captain Thompson. Ready to fly to Chicago? More than ready, he replied with a grin. Though I have to say, that was the most remarkable display of leadership I've ever witnessed. The businessman from 1C approached Zara as she headed toward the cockpit. Ma'am, I just want to say what you did today was remarkable. Not just standing up for yourself, but using this moment to create real change. I did what any person with power should do, she replied. I used it responsibly. Not to punish, but to transform. Not to destroy, but to rebuild. Because that's what real leadership means. As she reached the cockpit door, Zara paused and looked back at the cabin one final time. Passengers were settling in. Conversations were resuming, and the normal rhythm of air travel was returning. But nothing was truly normal anymore. Something fundamental had shifted. These stories, these real-life stories of discrimination confronted and justice served, they mattered because people witnessed them, shared them, and demanded change. Technology had made it impossible to hide bias in the shadows. Social media had given voice to those who had been silenced. And people with power had a choice. Use that power to maintain unjust systems, or transform those systems into something better. Flight 447 departed for Chicago 17 minutes late. A small delay in the grand scheme of things, but delay that would ripple across an entire industry for years to come. 6 months later, Zara stood before the National Aviation Diversity Summit in Denver, addressing an audience of 847 industry professionals. The irony of the number wasn't lost on her. It matched Skywing's quarterly revenue in millions. Today, I want to tell you about a flight that never took off on time, she began, her voice carrying across the packed auditorium, and how that delay changed an entire industry. The results were remarkable. Skywing had seen an 89% reduction in discrimination complaints. Customer satisfaction scores had increased 34%. Employee retention was up 28%. Most importantly, 12 other major airlines had adopted similar policies. What started on one aircraft has influenced an industry serving over 900 million passengers annually, Zara announced. The $5 million fund we established has trained over 15,000 airline employees across 47 airlines. She clicked to her final slide, a photo of Flight 447's first-class cabin, empty and peaceful. I could have used my corporate power to quietly fire those employees and move on. Instead, we chose transparency, accountability, and systemic change. Because real transformation happens when we turn moments of failure into opportunity for growth. The standing ovation lasted 97 seconds, the same amount of time she had been scheduled to present her original anti-discrimination policy before the incident occurred. Later that evening, Zara received a message that captured the true impact of that day. Ms. Williams, I'm starting pilot training next month. I'm a young black woman, and before your story, I wasn't sure I belonged in aviation. Thank you for making the industry safer for people like me. Thank you for showing us that we do belong. These stories, these real-life stories of bias confronted and overcome, had rippled far beyond a single flight. They had changed policies, procedures, and perspectives across an entire industry. True leadership, Zara had learned, wasn't about avoiding problems. It was about transforming them into solutions that served everyone. It was about using power not to elevate yourself, but to lift others up. And it was about ensuring that dignity and respect weren't just words in a mission statement, but lived values that shaped every interaction, every decision, every moment. 1 year after the incident, the Federal Aviation Administration incorporated Skywing's bias training into mandatory certification programs. Airport security protocols included specific guidelines for handling discrimination reports. And across the aviation industry, a new standard had been established. Not through legislation or litigation, but through one woman's decision to use her power to create change rather than simply punish wrongdoing. The video of that day had been viewed over 15 million times. But more importantly, it had sparked over 15,000 conversations in workplaces across America about bias, dignity, and the kind of world we choose to create together. Your voice can spark change too. Have you witnessed discrimination in your workplace, your community, or while traveling? When we speak up about injustice, we make it harder for bias to hide in the shadows. Every story shared is a step toward a more just world.